Welcome guys, today we'll make a short video about data types, more specifically numbers and strings. So we'll play a little bit with them and see how they work in Python. So let's get started. So computers uses values to store information or work with information. Now those values have different data types. And there are many different data types, but we can pretty much collect them in two categories. There are the primitive data types that are data types given by any given programming languages. So here would be, say, it's the primitive data types of Python. And there are user-made data types, data types that we will create, but we'll talk about those later. Now here we'll focus mostly on numbers and strings. So the number data types, the most common use is the integer. An integer is a number without any decimals, okay? And the float is a number with a decimal. So let's say we make a variable age of a person and we give it a value of 42. Now this, for Python, it is a integer. It knows it is an integer. You don't need, like in other programming languages, you don't need to tell Python what kind of variable you make. Normally, in a language like Java, you would do something like this. Int to tell it's an integer, and then call it age and give it a number. But in Python, it's very dynamic, and it already knows that if you put age equal 42, age is an integer. Now, okay, that's fine, but how about if we do like this? Age is equal 42.5, not point, so I need a point, not a comma. 0.5. Then now Python knows that age is a float. So one variable can change data types during your program. This works perfectly fine. Now we can test it if we make, for example, a print and we print the age. And now we will do it, let's see, once more in the end here. We save that and run it. You will see first it returns to you 42 and then 42.5. It's a very nice feature from Python that you don't need to worry about what kind of value you put in a variable. It will automatically handle that data type for you. But at the same time, you need to be careful because sometimes what happens is if you don't know what kind of data types come into your system, it will create an error because you maybe try to do something with two different data types that doesn't work and it needs a conversion. And you haven't noticed because we don't really follow right now the data types. So that's a danger. Now, in this particular case, integers and floats work perfectly fine together. So if we were to do that, for example, we create a new variable, new age, for example, and we say it is age. So here now it's 42.5 plus a integer number, let's say 20. And then let's print this. Let's print new age. We do this and you see now we get back to our 42, 42.5, and now we are at 62.5. So here, a basic operation, very basic arithmetic is no problem to do between the float data type and the age data type. Python handles that very nicely. In another language, like for example in C, you would have to manually convert one of them to adapt to the other. So here technically you would convert an integer into a float to make sure that your result, since your result is gonna need to be a float, it would become a float. But here in Python, no problem. But once again, I give a warning. This is something to think about when you're coding. Even if Python is handling it for you, you still need to think about what kind of data type you have in your variable. Okay, so we understand now what a data type is, but I've been using words like variable, and we created two of them, like new age and age. And it's important to understand we created two, not three, because here you can see we use age twice, and that is just, the first time we call it, we created it. The second time we use it, we just refer to it. Now, a variable, to make it simple, it is a little box, a little place on your memory where you can store information. And to access it, we give it a name. So here I gave it age. And usually it needs to know what kind of information it's going to store. So therefore, what kind of data type we're going to store. Here, Python handles that for us. So we can actually switch data types on the variable during the algorithm, which makes it very nice and easy for us. But in another language like Java or C++ or something, you would need to set then a data type to your variable, and only that kind of information, that kind of values could go in there. For those that are interested to learn a little bit more on the variable, I actually made a video on what is a variable. I would recommend to take a look. It explains a little bit deeper with some graphics what a variable is. The variable is one of the basic structures that we will be using all the time in Python. Okay, so that was the data types numbers, but there are other kind of data types. So let's say, for example, let's remove all of this. And let's say that we want to collect the name of a person. So we'll take the name. So here we'll create a variable name and we'll store inside the text value Robert. Okay, so that is the name of the person we want to store. Okay, and here you see that the type is different. It's not a number, it's a text, and we call this data type a string. So, and just for fun's sake, we'll keep the age. So we'll say that, for example, Robert is 23 years old. Okay. So here we have one variable name that is Robert and one variable age that is 23. And let's print this with a nice sentence. So first we'll say the name, so Robert. Okay, then we put a comma. Now we'll put a string that will be in all sentences we are writing, because it's not a variable, it is just a piece of string that will add extra in our print. So we'll make a space, is, and space. Then we'll put a comma and add then the age. Okay. So by doing this, we're using two variables to create one sentence that we want to print in this terminal. So now let's clear this quickly and then run it. Now you see, now the result is Robert is 23. Now we could add an extra, for example, text and say space years old. So now it says Robert is 23 years old. And if I were to go inside and change the name to, I don't know, Tiffany, and I'm not sure I write it correctly, but let's say that is, then the result changed. Tiffany is 23 years old. Now here we've been using two types of variables, strings and age, that is a integer. Okay. So those are two different data types, and we don't need to initiate them. But what happens if I was to do something like this? What would happen? Let's just play a little bit with this. What would happen if I would just print? Now I'm printing directly, so I'm making the operation inside the print function, okay? So what I'm doing is age plus name, okay? We're trying to make an addition between an integer and a string, okay? So here what happens is when you're using print like that, first what's going to happen is what's inside the parentheses, so age plus name, and then it will, the result of that will be printed on the screen, on the terminal, if this works. Now, let's try this. I'm saving and let's play. Let's play it. There we go. We get an error, okay? So here you can see it's a type error, unsupported operand. Type for plus int and string. As you see, even though we don't initiate a type on the variables, Python does it by itself, and still it's very important to keep remembering that we're working with data types, because here you can see if during your let me give you an example. Let's say you read a file from, you read numbers from a file, okay? So you're taking values from a file that you saved on your like an Excel file or a CSV file, and you collect them into variables. Now, if you don't convert them, you will actually collect strings, not integers or floats, okay? And then later on, you're trying to make some calculations with those numbers, but you will get an error because it doesn't work since there are strings, but there are no places in your program where you actually did a check for what kind of type you're loading into your system. Now, that is why there are ways of transforming. For example, if I'm changing, let's say that, let's play once again. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make two numbers. Let's go again and try from scratch. Now, we're going to make A is equal to 5, and then B is equal to 10. Okay, so now if we try again to print this, we should get an error, A plus B. See, did I do something wrong? This is supposed to be A, there, A plus B. We save this, and then we print it. And once again, we get an error. But now, let's say you have a string and you want to make it into an integer. So what you're going to do is, no, sorry, that's another language. What you're going to say is say int, and then we, okay. Now we save. And what happens now is that by doing int parentheses b, you're converting the string b into an integer, okay? And then you add it to a that is also an integer. So now you get your 15, and that is correct, okay? So see, we're playing with data types to make you understand that even though you're not giving data types yourself to Python, still Python works with the data types, and it's important to understand that concept. Okay, let's stop here for today. We've seen how data type works and how important they are in Python. So I hope you enjoyed, and there will be more videos on Python and how to get started with Python. So please follow if you're interested for more, and I hope to see you soon. Okay, have a nice day.